has her or knows where she is, that it's never too late.
7 words. That is all it takes to crack this entire case wide open. Not from a gossip column. Not from a true crime blogger chasing clicks at midnight. From a man who spent decades inside the Federal Bureaus of Investigation, working the most complex abduction cases this country has seen. A man who sat down with a national news outlet, looked straight into the record and said something that should have stopped every conversation about this case dead in its tracks. The plan was not to hurt her. Let that land. Because in the world of a true crime documentary investigation, 7 words from a credentialed federal source carry a weight that no surveillance frame, no ransom letter, no DNA result can match on its own. 7 words that do not describe a crime the way it ended. They describe a crime that was never supposed to happen the way it did. This is the Nancy Guthrie case. And if you have followed this documentary series from the beginning, you already know the surface of it. Early morning hours of February 1st, the Catalina Foothills neighborhood north of Tucson, Arizona, elevated and quiet, the kind of place where nothing like this is supposed to reach. The mask, the backpack, the firearm, the surveillance footage, the blood left behind on that residential porch, while the rest of that city slept without any idea what was unfolding in the dark a few miles away. You know the what. This video is about the why, and more precisely about the single moment when the why collapsed into something no one believes was ever part of the original design. Most true crime coverage stops at the act. It catalogs the violence, traces the evidence, reconstructs the timeline, and presents the result as the intention. But intention and result are not the same thing. In this case, treating them as the same thing means missing the most important truth buried inside one of the most disturbing disappearances in recent American history. The question no one has asked with enough force is not who took Nancy Guthrie. It is not where she is. Not the ransom communications or the federal manhunt or the investigative threads 9 episodes of this series have already laid out. The question is this: what was supposed to happen that morning? What did the person dressed head to toe in deliberate concealment, carrying a firearm and a backpack, wearing a mask designed to strip away every recognizable feature of a human face? What did that person believe was about to take place? Because the answer to that question changes everything. It changes how you read the blood on the porch, the forensic evidence, the behavioral record, the surveillance footage that trained federal analysts have described in terms this documentary is going to break down completely without letting a single detail blur past without meaning. It points, with a clarity that is almost difficult to sit with, toward one specific moment. A moment that lasted maybe 1 second, that required no weapon, no physical force, no action of any kind, a moment of recognition. She looked at the person who came for her, and she knew him. In that instant, every single exit this plan was built around ceased to exist. That is what this documentary is about. Stay with this. Every minute of the next 36 matters. Andrew Bringwell did not stumble onto this case. That matters. In true crime documentary coverage, there is a version of expert commentary that is purely reactive. Someone hands a retired investigator a case file. They skim the headlines, they offer a take. That is not what happened here. Bringwell sought this case out. He reviewed the available evidence independently, watched the surveillance footage, studied the timeline, the crime scene, the backpack, the firearm, and the ransom communications. He did the work. Then he sat down with Newsweek and said something the true crime community acknowledged, and then moved past without fully absorbing what it meant. His words, on the record. The subject's intent was to kidnap Mrs. Guthrie, but something went wrong. Violence took place, and she was injured, but not killed. This is not a grieving family member speaking from hope. Andrew Bringwell spent his career inside federal law enforcement working cases most people will never hear about, building the kind of analytical framework that only comes from years sitting across from evidence of what human beings are capable of when a plan breaks apart. His professional assessment on the record is that the intent was kidnapping, not murder, not assault, kidnapping, a controlled taking with a purpose that extends beyond the act itself, a design that requires the target to remain alive, functional, and in a condition that makes the next phase of the plan executable. That single determination reshapes the entire documentary record of this case. Bringwell went further. He noted that if the intent had been to end Nancy Guthrie's life, the person on that porch had every tool required: a loaded, accessible firearm, and a target who is 84 years old, alone, and taken completely by surprise in the early hours of a February morning. If killing her was the goal, it required a single action with a weapon already drawn. He did not take that action. In behavioral criminal analysis, the absence of an action a person was fully equipped to take is not a neutral data point. It is evidence. It tells you what that person was actually there to do. He was not there to end her life. He was there to take her, hold her, use her continued existence as the mechanism of whatever exchange he had already designed before he ever set foot on that driveway. The violence that did occur was not the execution of a plan. It was the destruction of one. Bringwell then referenced a case that deserves serious attention. The 1991 kidnapping of Carrie Lawson, a 25-year-old Alabama attorney taken not to be destroyed but to be leveraged. The same structural premise as the Guthrie case. The suspect was Jerry Bland. The plan had a logic and a designed endpoint that required Carrie Lawson to be alive because a living person is leverage, and a person who is gone is just a loss. Then the plan collapsed. Carrie Lawson was killed. Her body was never recovered. Bland eventually took his own life. His cousin was sentenced to life in prison for her role in the kidnapping. Bringwell said that case broke on the day his eldest daughter was born, and that it still reaches him. He raised it in the context of the Guthrie case because the structural blueprint is identical. Both began as kidnappings for leverage. In the Lawson case, the plan collapsed and the victim did not survive. In the Guthrie case, the plan collapsed. Violence occurred, and his on-record assessment is that she was injured but not killed. The lesson the Lawson case teaches is the one every analyst who has studied ransom-motivated abductions understands. When the plan breaks, the outcome is not determined by what the person who designed it wanted. It is determined by the decisions a panicking individual makes in the gap between the plan they prepared and the reality that replaced it. That gap is where this documentary is going next. Before we get to the collapse, we have to understand the confidence, because that is the part of this true crime case the documentary record has consistently underplayed. Everyone has focused on the forensic dimensions of that footage. The mask, the backpack, the holster. The moment he reached into the yard and used vegetation to obscure the camera lens instead of a purpose-built tool. Those forensic dimensions matter, but they are not the most revealing thing that footage contains. The most revealing thing is how he moves. Former FBI agent and University of South Florida criminology professor Brianna Fox watched that footage and chose her words with the precision of someone whose entire career is built on reading human behavior. She did not say, he walked up. She did not say he approached. She said he almost saunters, like that is his house. Sauntering is the complete absence of urgency. The movement pattern of a person whose internal forecast for the next few minutes contains nothing that demands alarm. The body language of someone who has run the scenario in their head, seen how it ends, and arrived at the conclusion that the outcome is not in serious doubt. That is not how someone moves when they are uncertain. That is how someone moves when they believe, below conscious thought, that this is already handled. Former FBI agent Mark Harrion, who previously led the FBI's firearms training program, watched the same footage through a different analytical lens. His observation was about what the suspect did not bring. A sophisticated individual, Harrion told the New York Post, would have arrived with something purpose-built to deal with the camera. Spray paint, a small tool, something that eliminates the problem before it. The becomes one. The suspect did not bring those things. He improvised and grabbed a plant. True crime coverage has treated that as evidence of poor planning. But Harrion's read goes deeper. A person who has thoroughly gamed out failure modes brings the spray paint. A person thoroughly confident that the plan will succeed grabs whatever is nearby, because in their mental model, the camera is a minor inconvenience in a situation they have already won in their head. He did not pack for problems because he did not believe there were going to be any. Now add the firearm. Harrion noted that the holster configuration was tactically unusual. The weapon carried openly at the front of the body in what investigators identified as an inexpensive off-brand holster, not the setup of someone trained in operational firearms use. His read was direct. This was potentially someone not normally armed, someone for whom the gun was more instrument of theater than force, something carried to be seen, not used. Produce compliance rather than violence. You carry a visible firearm in a compliance-based abduction for one reason, so the target sees it immediately and understands that cooperation is the only rational option. That gun was the final piece of a compliance architecture. It was not there to end anything. It was there to make everything else unnecessary. Then there is the forensic preparation, which sits in sharp contrast to all the above. Weaver Bargman, 26 years with the Pima County Sheriff's Department before becoming a private crime scene reconstructionist, examined the footage and focused on the suspect's wardrobe. Every inch of skin covered. Mask, gloves, jacket, long pants, covered shoes. Head to foot, nothing exposed. Nothing that could leave a biological trace or transfer a fiber. That level of coverage reflects a genuine forensic awareness. It is not impulsive behavior. It is deliberate premeditation. Hold both realities at once. Forensic preparation that reflects careful premeditation. Camera improvisation that reflects a person who never seriously considered the plan failing. Together they describe one specific kind of person. He thought about the evidence he would leave after the fact because plans have aftermaths. He did not think about complications during the plan, because in his mental model the plan had no complications worth preparing for. 3 trained analysts, 3 areas of expertise, 1 consistent portrait. A man who arrived at that house unhurried and unafraid, operating from a blueprint that said this situation was already resolved before it began. He believed he knew exactly how this was going to go. He was wrong about one thing. And that one thing was enough to bring the entire design down. The mask was not just protecting a face, it was protecting the ending. In a controlled abduction for ransom or leverage, every clean resolution of the plan depended on one condition being maintained from the first second to the last. She could not know who took her. That is not a secondary concern. That is the operational spine. A released target who can identify her abductor makes a phone call within minutes. That call ends with federal charges and a life that ceases to exist in any recognizable form. Every path in this plan that required Nancy Guthrie to go home required her not to know who came for her. The mask was not hiding a face. The mask was holding the future together. And when the mask stopped working, the future it was protecting collapsed at exactly the same moment. But identity is not only a face. That is the critical miscalculation buried inside this plan. A mask covers a face. It does not cover a voice. It does not cover a build, a posture, a height, or the specific way a human body distributes its weight when standing still. It does not cover the unconscious physical vocabulary that people who have spent years in close proximity absorb without any deliberate effort to learn it. The way shoulders sit when someone is tense, the tilt of a head as individual as a fingerprint, the rhythm of familiar breathing, the specific quality of presence that someone who knows another person well enough has cataloged below language, below conscious thought, all of it readable, none of it masked. Nancy Guthrie had been part of that Catalina Foothills community for years. She attended her church regularly. She had the same neighbors across the same duration. The accumulated social knowledge of decades of embedded presence in a tight-knit residential world. Not just names, not just faces, the physical signatures of the people in her immediate universe. Former FBI behavioral analyst Johnny Grusing spent 25 years inside the FBI's Denver division and coordinated its behavioral analysis unit for 13 of those years. His public assessment is stated without ambiguity. Whatever occurred was not what the suspect intended. He got in way over his head. The violence was not part of the design. It was the consequence of a design that stopped working in a way he had not prepared for. Think about what recognition means in this specific context. He arrived with a compliance architecture built around a visible firearm, a mask he believed would neutralize identity, and a mental model of a target who would see the weapon and cooperate. He had prepared for the forensic aftermath with genuine care. He had not prepared for failure because in his version of the next few minutes, it was not going to fail. Then she registered something. Maybe his voice. Maybe the specific way he held his body in the dark. The height, the build, the unconscious physical signature of a person she had been in proximity to, enough times that recognition bypassed the cognitive layer entirely and arrived as instinct. A wordless knowing that precedes thought and does not wait for confirmation. She knew him. And in that single moment, every exit this plan had been built around ceased to exist simultaneously. His knowledge gave him access. Her knowledge cost him everything, because the question he did not ask, the one variable he failed to build into the design, despite the fact that the answer would have changed everything, was the simplest one available. Does she know me back? If the answer was yes, and the behavioral evidence of what happened on that porch suggests strongly that it was, then the mask was always going to be insufficient, not because it physically failed, because some people cannot be made anonymous to someone who already knows them from years of shared proximity. He prepared for face recognition, the straightforward visual match a mask is built to defeat. He did not prepare for the deeper kind, the kind that operates from accumulated familiarity and arrives before conscious thought can organize around it. That was the catastrophic misjudgment at the center of this plan. What remained after that moment was not a plan. What remained was a man on a residential porch in Tucson, in the dark, holding a target he could no longer release, with no prepared response for any version of what had just happened. Grusing described this psychological state with precision. When a person operating inside a prepared plan suddenly loses the plan, what follows is not a calm pivot to alternatives. It is panic in the clinical sense. The collapse of the decision-making framework the plan was providing, replaced by the fractured reactive logic of someone who believes every viable path is closed at once. He reacted, and his reaction, driven by panic rather than preparation, produced the blood on that porch. The violence was not the plan. The violence was the plan's collapse and made physical. Every true crime documentary eventually comes back to the physical evidence, not because it is always the most revealing layer of a case, but because it does not speculate. It does not operate from a hope or grief or the bias of someone who has already decided what happened and is working backward from that conclusion. The physical evidence on that porch tells a story, and this documentary is going to read it carefully, because most coverage has looked at that blood and drawn the most emotionally available conclusion rather than the most forensically supported one. Those are not the same conclusion. Retired FBI Special Agent Maureen O'Connell analyzed the crime scene photographs and focused on a characteristic most true crime coverage acknowledged and then moved past. There were no voids. A void is the negative space left in a blood pattern when a body part interrupts the path between the blood source and the surface it falls onto. A person standing over their own blood leaves voids from their feet. A person being dragged leaves directional smearing, elongated trails, the signature of weight pulled across a plane. O'Connell found none of that. No voids. No drag signatures. No directional smearing consistent with a body being pulled across that surface. What she found was a pattern consistent with a specific and deliberate action. Her conclusion, stated plainly, was that Nancy Guthrie was wrapped in something and carried out, not dragged, carried. In the forensic language of true crime investigation, that distinction is enormous. Dragging is disposal behavior. It is what a person does with something they no longer value. Carrying is a management behavior. It is what a person does with something fragile, something whose condition on the other end of the transport matters to whatever comes next. You carry something you still need. Even in the chaos of a collapsed plan, and even inside the fractured logic of panic, he wrapped her and carried her. Because even in the ruin of everything he had built, she was still the asset. Still the leverage. Still the one thing the entire plan had been structured around. That behavioral signal, embedded in the physical evidence of how she left that porch, is one of the most significant data points in this investigation. Then, there is the second layer. A forensic pathologist who examined the crime scene photographs separately focused on the morphology of the blood drops themselves. What the pathologist identified were drops with pale centers and a donut formation, a specific shape blood takes when expelled through respiration rather than from an open wound, the forensic signature of a person who is breathing in the moments those drops are formed. Taken together, O'Connell's analysis and the pathologist's findings produce a forensic picture consistent with one conclusion. Nancy Guthrie was alive when she left that porch. Andrew Bringwell said it directly in Newsweek, injured but not killed. The physical evidence, read by trained analysts applying established principles, supports that assessment with a consistency this documentary believes has not been communicated clearly enough to the true crime audience following this case. The violence on that porch was real. No framework, no analytical lens softens that. An 84-year-old woman was harmed in her home. That carries a gravity no investigative context dissolves. But the violence was not execution. It was disruption made physical. A plan breaking apart and producing a consequence its designer had spent deliberate thought trying to prevent. Because a harmed target is compromised leverage. A target who cannot be presented as proof of life damages the very asset the plan required. The blood on that porch is not the story of what someone came to do. It is the story of the distance between what someone planned and what panic produces when the plan meets the one variable it was not built to survive. She was alive when she left, which means the question of where she is right now is not a question about where something ended. It is a question about where something is still unfolding. The behavioral profile of a person who executes a prepared plan and exits cleanly is a fundamentally different investigative problem than the profile of a person who improvised in panic. Not easier, not harder necessarily, different in ways that are specific and that tell us something precise about where this investigation stands right now. A prepared person has rehearsed. They have considered every trace they know to minimize. Execution looks clean and is slow to unravel. That is not the person this documentary has been describing. The person this documentary has been describing arrived confident but underprepared for failure, grabbed vegetation because he did not bring what a more prepared individual would have brought, carried a firearm in a configuration every trained federal agent described as tactically unsound, built a compliance architecture that was sophisticated in ambition, but critically flawed in its central assumption about what a mask could actually conceal. That person did not exit cleanly. That person improvised under panic. An improvisation under panic leaves a trail of a completely different character than the trail left by preparation. A person reacting to a situation they did not design makes decisions driven by immediate need rather than long-term strategy. They reach out to people they should not contact. They make the predictable errors of a mind-managing fear rather than method. Those mistakes are patterned. Trained investigators know exactly how to read them. Johnny Grusing said it directly. The FBI is working this case with a clear understanding of what kind of person they are pursuing. Not a professional, not someone with a history of executing this kind of operations cleanly. Someone who got in way over his head. Someone who has been living since February 1st inside the psychological reality of managing the aftermath of something that did not go as planned. Every morning he wakes up inside it. Every new development in this case, every FBI press conference, every true crime documentary video that breaks down another layer of behavioral and forensic evidence lands on a person already carrying an internal weight that accumulates rather than diminishes with time. He is watching this investigation, monitoring the coverage, making decisions about his daily behavior under the compounding pressure of a federal investigation that has not slowed down and has not gone cold. People crack under that kind of weight. They talk when they should not. They behave in ways that make someone who knows them look twice. They say things under accumulated pressure they would never say in a calm moment. The very amateur quality that defined the approach to that porch on February 1st is the same quality that makes the aftermath unsustainable. The FBI understands this. The investigative strategy around this case reflects that understanding at every visible level. When Savannah Guthrie stood in front of a camera and said that it is never too late to do the right thing, those words were not accidental. Grusing's assessment was direct. They were aimed with precision at a suspect whose profile suggests he is not hardened, not professionally detached, not capable of carrying this indefinitely without reaching a breaking point. The FBI is not simply processing evidence. It is managing pressure, applying it deliberately toward the psychology of the person they are pursuing. And here's the dimension the recognition theory sharpens into something specific. If Nancy Guthrie recognized the person who came for her, he is not a stranger. Strangers are found through databases and forensic matches in a universe of possible individuals with no defined boundary. A person known to Nancy Guthrie exists inside a defined radius, bounded by the geography of her world, her neighborhood, her church, her family's immediate orbit, a finite number of people, a finite number of relationships, a finite universe of possible matches that investigators have been systematically working through since the first hours of this case. Nancy Guthrie is not a case file. She is not a behavioral profile or a forensic data set or a documentary subject whose story exists to be analyzed and filed away into the long catalog of American true crime that this country consumes with an appetite that never fully settles. She is an 84-year-old woman who went to sleep in her home in the Catalina foothills on the night of January 31st and did not wake up the next morning in the same world she closed her eyes in. She has a heart condition. She requires daily medication and to maintain the kind of physical stability a person her age depends on to keep functioning. She was alive when she left that porch. That is not wishful thinking. That is the conclusion of trained forensic analysts reading physical evidence with the dispassionate methodology of people whose job is to tell the truth about what the evidence says regardless of what anyone wants it to say. The blood drops, the carry pattern, the absence of drag evidence, the respiratory morphology, all of it consistent with Andrew Bringwell's on-record assessment, injured but not killed. The person who took her is living under a weight that compounds every single day. He is not a professional. He is not built to carry this indefinitely without the accumulated pressure producing the kind of behavioral signal that reaches the people around him and then reaches the investigators, listening for exactly that signal. Someone in the world of this case has already seen those signals, maybe not understood exactly what they were looking at, maybe filed it away as something slightly off, slightly inconsistent with the person they thought they knew, but seen it. And that person, the one who has been holding something and waiting for the moment it connected to something larger, is the most important person in this investigation. Right now, who is not already inside a federal building. If that is you, if something in the 9 weeks of coverage of this case has connected to something you observed or heard or noticed in someone around you in the days and weeks following February 1st, do not dismiss that connection. Do not decide it is probably nothing. Do not protect someone who did not protect Nancy Guthrie. The FBI tip line is active, 1-800-CALL-FBI, tips.fbi.gov. Every call is reviewed. The piece you are holding may be the one that makes the picture clear. This is how true crime cases break. Not always from a single dramatic revelation, not always from a forensic match that announces itself. Sometimes from a person who noticed something small, reported it, and trusted the investigators to understand why it mattered in a context broader than any individual can see from their particular vantage point. Now, there is one more thing this documentary needs to say before it closes. It is directed at the person who designed the plan that failed. It is never too late to do the right thing.
Has her or knows where she is. That it's never too late.
Not because the legal consequences disappear. They do not. Not because the harm done to Nancy Guthrie is undone by a decision made now. It is not. But because there is still a version of this that does not end in the worst possible way for everyone it touches. There is still a difference between what comes next if federal investigators close in on a defined target and what becomes possible if the person carrying this weight makes a different decision before that moment arrives. She is 84 years old. She has a heart condition. She requires daily medication. Every day that passes is a day that the specific medical reality of her situation impresses against whatever condition she is being held in. Every additional week adds physiological stakes that no leverage calculation changes. She needs to come home, not as a resolution to a documentary, as a human being who is 84 years old and somewhere right now in a situation she did not choose.
They were following it the morning it was laid down, and they have not stopped. We will be here when it ends. If you have been following this case, if something in what you just heard connects to something you know, something you saw, something a person in your life
you are not already part of this series.
Around February
Share this video
1st,
if someone in your world might be holding a piece of this puzzle.
Do not dismiss it.
And if you know something,
FBI
say
tip
something.
line is active.
This case is not going cold.
FBI.
This investigation is not standing still. Nancy Guthrie is waiting,
Every piece of information
and we will
is
be here when
reviewed.
this ends.
Every